Hi friends, I'm Michael Kingswood and it's story time. And we are very late this week. You can tell from the background, I'm not recording this from home. I'm in an Airbnb here in the Washington, D.C. area. And get late into the reason I'm late is because last week I had a little bit of a catastrophe with my laptop. And laptop's a thing where I record everything through it. My camera is in the laptop, and obviously, if the laptop goes offline, I can't record because that's the only camera I've got. So it took a couple days to get the laptop fixed, and then I just had to scramble because I was getting ready to go on this trip which I am currently Airbnb-ing from, because I'm recording this on Thursday of this week, the same day I'm going to put this up. I'm in DC for a high school reunion, and then I'm going to go with my buddy to bring his sailboat down from Norfolk, Virginia area down to Charleston, South Carolina. So that's going to take the next couple weeks. And I intended to get the next portion of the Delphinus story, to finish it up to you last weekend, but because of everything with the laptop and chicanery, I haven't been able to get around to it until just now. Because as you know, when you go to take a trip, especially an extended trip like this one that I'm taking, you kind of have to. There's a lot of things you got to get squared away before you leave home for a few weeks. Not to leave, kids and all that stuff, but also for cash flow purposes, I had to really hit it pretty hard the last couple weeks, and that included the first few days of this week before leaving, so I'm not underwater completely by taking this trip, which I won't be. Everything's fine, but it's just how it was. But anyway, that's the reason why this episode is late. But it's getting to you anyway, so that's a good thing. We're finishing up the story of Delphinus this week, and with this episode, and then they will be on hiatus from Story Saturday for a couple weeks. What I'm going to do, though, is do some streaming, I think, from the sailboat, since my buddy likes the same guy that, if you put up a couple shorts on my channel here previously from my sailing trip with this same friend last year, and he kind of digs showing off, so we'll probably do some streaming from the boat, but can't commit to anything more than that for the next couple weeks. So anyway, sit back and enjoy the rest of this story, and we'll talk a little bit more about the rest of life, the universe, and everything on the other side.
Sleep was impossible for the rest of the night, not just because of the horror they'd witnessed. The creatures growled, roared, and barked, and tried endlessly to ascend the shuttle's hulk. One got halfway up, but Stan knocked it off with a strong kick to the muzzle. Then, after an hour or so, it began to rain, a light drizzle which quenched the last remnants of the fire, leaving them in near total darkness. Even worse, though the drizzle at first was little more than an annoyance, it gradually drenched them all, leaving them to shiver miserably in the darkness. It was particularly uncomfortable for Piter. The cold made his injured back stiffen up, and every position he sat or lay in was an exercise in pain. Slowly, inexorably, the darkness began to fade, replaced by the faintest hint of twilight as the drizzle came to a stop. As that happened, the creature's behavior began to change. While some continued to roar and scramble at the shuttle, trying to reach the survivors, several began to whinny and walk in circles. Finally, when it became light enough to see the creatures as more than just shadows moving in near blackness, the larger creature let out a drawn-out, gurgling call, then turned and scampered away. As if on cue, the smaller ones turned their heads to the side, then in unison turned and followed the larger one away. Except for the 5 that had been whinnying. They turned away as well, but their gaits were unsteady. As they moved to follow the others, one lost its footing and collapsed to the ground. Several meters later, a second dropped. Then a third, just before the group moved out of sight. Piter could only assume the others did not make it very far before falling as well. "What?" Shawnee swallowed, her gaze darting around in the gloom and her expression saying she couldn't believe what she was seeing. "What just happened?" Piter shook his head. He was baffled as well. It seemed too good to be true that the creatures had just left, that they weren't playing a ruse of some sort. so no one left the top of the shuttle for a long time, but finally, after it was fully light, Stan shrugged his shoulders and slid down to the shuttle's crushed nose, then jumped the rest of the way down to the ground. Piter watched, his heart in his throat, as Stan quickly circled the perimeter of the camp. Completing the circuit, Stan looked back up at them and spread his hands with another shrug. Then he beckoned them to join him as he crouched down next to one of the collapsed creatures. Piter and Shawnee exchanged glances, then slid off the shuttle as well. Piter nearly fell over when he reached the ground. The landing jarred his back, sending a flare of pain running up his spine. But he managed to keep his feet, and gritting his teeth, he followed Shawnee over to Stan. The creature didn't appear to be wounded. There didn't appear to be anything wrong with it at all, aside from the fact that it was dead, and terrifying to look at, especially with drying blood still splattered all over its muzzle. "So what killed it?" Piter said quietly. "Hell if I know," Stan replied. "Does it matter?" "It might." Stan stood back up and looked off in the direction the creatures took when they left. "Let's check the others." The other 2 creatures in the camp were the same, dead, without visible wounds. A few minutes searching revealed them 2 missing creatures, also dead. The only difference was it appeared one of the creatures had vomited before dying. Seeing the vomit pool, Shawnee cursed. It was Ben. "Yeah, I'm sure it was, babe, but try not to think about..." Piter's words stuck in his throat as he turned his gaze from the creature to Shawnee. Her expression was serious, even grim, not repulsed. She shook her head vigorously at Piter's statement. "No, I mean it was eating Ben that killed it." "Huh?" Stan cut in. "Look, maybe we shouldn't talk about this in front of..." He stopped talking abruptly and looked around in confusion. "Where's Shirley?" Piter blinked. "Didn't she come with us?" Shawnee said, her voice becoming suddenly fearful again. As they rushed back to the camp, Piter couldn't help but fear the worst, but when they arrived, Shirley was still seated atop the shuttle. Piter felt a surge of relief that died quickly as they drew nearer to her. She sat Indian style, her gaze fixed on the place where Ben had died. It wasn't hard to find, as it was strewn about with chewed-on body parts, shredded clothing, and, despite the drizzle for half the night, a large amount of gore. The rest of them made a point of not looking at it too closely, but her eyes never moved from the spot, never seemed to blink. The 3 of them shared a look, then Shawnee climbed back up onto the shuttle. Stan and Piter moved away to give them some privacy. They found the water bucket, upended and empty, not far from the shuttle. "Well, that sucks," Piter muttered. Stan nodded. His lips pursed for a moment as he looked away in the direction of the lake. "We're going to need more water," he paused as he looked back at Piter. "Maybe we should just go to the lake for good." Piter shook his head. "I don't think so. The first rule when waiting for a rescue is to not move around. Stay where people are most likely to come looking. The beacon will lead the rescue here, so..." He shrugged. Stan snorted. "This isn't the Boy Scouts, Piter. Those things are going to come back, you know. They're probably night hunters, but even if they don't come, something else will. This place probably smells like a smorgasbord." Looking around, Piter was forced to concede Stan's last point at least. Still, the shuttle provided a bit of shelter, and Piter was forced to admit, being able to see a piece of civilization, however battered, was oddly comforting. "I don't know." Stan bent over and picked up the bucket. "We're going to need water regardless, and it'll be safer to remain in a group. Let's just go and check out what the lake has to offer. If there's nothing promising, we can come back." That made sense. Despite his misgivings about leaving, Piter couldn't think of any other reason to stay, and the notion of being there when the creatures returned was unappealing at best. "Okay, let's do it." A few minutes later, Shawnee slid down the shuttle and rejoined them. Her expression was grim. "She's lost it. I haven't been able to get her to say a word, and she won't stop staring at..." She gestured toward Ben's scattered remains. Piter cursed under his breath. "Well, do you think you can get her to move? We're going to head to the lake, and we need to leave before those things come back." Shawnee looked doubtful, but she nodded. "I'll try." When she climbed back up, Stan took a moment to examine Piter's injury. Thankfully, he wasn't cut, but there was an impressive bruise that encompassed most of his left side. No wonder it hurt to move too quickly, or to twist. The women were deeply engaged in conversation when Piter lowered his shirt and looked up, or at least, Shawnee was leaning close to Shirley and talking quietly with her. It was unclear whether Shirley was responding or not. But there was no time to worry about it. He had to trust Shawnee would get results. Going into the shuttle, Piter switched on the instruments again, while Stan rooted through the cargo area for anything they may have missed in their previous searches. Piter felt his hopes shrink, though he hadn't thought that was possible this morning. The instrument console was extremely dim, Clearly, the shuttle's reserve power cells were nearing the end of their capacity. He called up the transmitter status display and was gratified to see the beacon was still functioning, though the transmit power was much reduced from the last time he checked. Then he noticed the receiver status was flashing and he tapped to shift the display. His heart leapt. As the display shifted, it became clear an incoming transmission had come in at some point during the night. He hit the playback, but all that came through was several seconds of a barely discernible voice that was overwhelmed by static. Still, it was something, and when he switched off the console, Piter did so with a much improved spirit. Stan managed to yank a pole that had been installed as an attachment point for cargo bins from the wall, about a meter long with a jagged break at one end where the crash had dislodged it. It would be useful as a tool, or a weapon. But aside from that, there was nothing else of use. Stan left. Before following him out, Piter picked up a shard of broken plastic and carved a message in the vinyl of the pilot's chair. Went to lake. 4 survivors. Piter emerged from the shuttle and was pleased to see both ladies standing on the ground. Shirley still looked wild-eyed, but at least she was up and about. There wasn't much to bring along with them, just the bucket, the first aid kit, the flares, and Stan's pole, so without further ado they set off in the direction of the lake. It was a long walk, though not particularly difficult. As Ben had told them the day before, it was mostly downhill. Still, it was a good 10 kilometers or more, and by the end it was all Piter could do to put one foot in front of the other. His back throbbed with each step, and if he hadn't had Stan's pole to use as a walking stick, and Shawnee to offer him support as well, there's no way he could have stayed on his feet. But finally, they walked between the last 2 trees and stepped out onto a field that ran down to the edge of the lake. It was a breathtaking view. Now that they were out from beneath the forest's canopy, he could see that the clouds had parted. Gamma Delphinus, glowing white in the sky alongside its orangish companion star, was a unique enough view for Piter, who'd grown up in a single-star system. But more interesting still was the moon's mother planet, dominating the sky just above the horizon and clearly visible even now with the stars just a bit past local noon. Combined with the highly reflective lake and a mountain range in the distance, Piter wished fervently that he had a camera because it was an award-worthy image. But there was no time to sit around and enjoy the view. It went without saying that the creatures would follow their trail to the lake, and they needed to find a secure place to camp. The most likely candidate was a rocky outcropping thrusting up from the lake shore a kilometer or so off to their left. Piter groaned inwardly at the thought of walking that far, bad as his back hurt. But staying still here in the open was not an option, so he pressed on with the others. It was very slow going, with Piter barely able to walk, but eventually they made it to the outcropping. It was about 50 meters tall, sheer on the side facing the lake, and very steep on the others. There was only one part of the outcropping that looked to offer a walkable path up to the top, but even that was boulder-strewn and required them to climb hand over hand at one point. It was perfect. And perfectly difficult, especially for Piter with his bad back and Shawnee with her injured arm. Shirley was no help at all, just following along with a blank stare, saying nothing. So Stan was left to assist the rest of them to the top. Even with Stan's help, the ascent was grueling for Piter, particularly the vertical ascent, short as it was. His back was bad enough, but 2 days without food had left his stomach feeling like a huge empty cavern. By the time he reached the top, he was totally spent and he collapsed to the ground. He would have passed out if his back hadn't hurt so damn much. "We need to find something to eat," Stan said as he, too, flopped down onto the ground. "I don't think we can," replied Shawnee. She looked sidelong at Shirley, who had settled down a short distance away and sat silently, staring out at the lake. Lowering her voice, Shawnee continued, "I think eating Ben and the other bodies poisoned those creatures, and that's what killed them. So if we are poisonous to the creatures here, they're probably poisonous to us as well." They were silent for a long time after that. Even if Shawnee was wrong, they couldn't exactly risk it. Piter prayed silently, forgetting for a moment that he didn't really believe in God, that the static-laden voice he'd heard over the receiver was from the rescue, and that the voice's owner would arrive soon. He wasn't looking forward to starving to death. They rested for a few minutes, then took stock of their surroundings. There were only a few scraggly bushes and a single small tree on the outcropping. If the 4 of them were going to camp there, they were going to need some firewood and water. Piter was in no condition to move, let alone haul heavy loads, and Shirley remained all but catatonic, so it fell on Stan and Shirley to gather what the group needed. With hardly a grumble, the two stood and made their way back down the rocks. Watching them go, Piter felt a twinge of guilt. He should be helping. But even gathering himself to try to follow after them sent spikes of pain throughout his lower back and, disturbingly, through his lower abdomen as well. With a groan, he laid back onto the ground and tried to relax, to get some rest. A scream roused him from a light slumber. Startled to wakefulness by the sound, he sat bolt upright, not even noticing the pain in his back, and looked around. Stan and Shawnee were nowhere to be seen. Shirley was on her feet a short distance away, still looking out at the lake. She had her hands pressed to her temples, and she screamed again, a piercing wail of pain and despair. "Shirley," Piter began, but stopped, his breath catching in his throat, as she turned to look back at him. Shirley's eyes were wide, her face contorted with pain, but also with something else, something wrong, like madness. He'd never seen such an expression on a person before, except in the holovids, and only then in tales of horror. But then she had been living a horror tale for the last day. They all had. "I've lost him," she wailed, pulling at her hair with both hands. "Lost everything." Piter gulped. "It's going to be okay. The rescue..." She barked out a bitter laugh and turned away. More softly, she muttered, "Rescue. What good is that?" He tried again. "When we get out of here, you can rebuild." "There's nothing to rebuild. It's all over." She took a step forward, stopping on the edge of the outcropping. Piter felt a chill going down his spine. "Surely no!" "Why not?" Piter tried to stand, but fell over as his back spasmed. On his belly, he began to crawl over to her. "Come back from there. You don't want to." "I don't want to go on." With that, she stepped off the ledge. Piter shouted her name and reached out in vain to stop her, but she was too far out of reach. She plunged out of sight, and he scrambled frantically toward the edge. Maybe she landed somewhere farther below, where they could reach her. He forced himself to crawl faster. Finally, after what seemed forever, he reached the edge and looked over. The face of the outcropping was just as sheer as it had appeared from below. There was nowhere to land except the lake, and it would be one hell of a difficult climb under the best conditions. Far down below, bobbing in the lake, he could see Shirley's body, floating face down. She wasn't moving. Deep sadness welled up within him, eclipsed a heartbeat later by anger. Anger at their predicament, at fate, and at Shirley for doing such a thing. Then anger gave way to shame at thinking ill of a woman he barely knew, whose world had just been gruesomely destroyed while she could only watch. Disgusted at himself, Piter pushed himself away from the edge and rolled over onto his back. The flare of pain as he shifted his weight only heightened his suffering. "Piter!" Shawnee came rushing into view, Stan just a few paces behind. Concern, near panic, was etched on her face. Seeing him lying there, she rushed over and engulfed him in an embrace. "We heard the screams. What happened?" "Where's Shirley?" Stan added. Piter squeezed Shawnee tightly as he replied. "She threw herself over the edge." He heard Shawnee gasp in his ear, then begin to sob. Stan looked shocked. Walking over to the edge, he looked down for a long moment. When he turned back to them, he shook his head and squatted down next to them. "And then there were 3, Stan muttered. There was nothing to do except say a few prayers for Shirley and then get back to work. The twin suns were getting closer to the horizon, and they definitely didn't want to be caught down in the clearing when night fell and the creatures returned. So Stan and Shawnee spent the last few hours before sundown hauling up the last of the wood and water they'd gathered earlier. As before, Piter sat, nursing his back. But it didn't get any better. In fact, his discomfort just got worse as the afternoon turned into evening. The pain spread from his lower back, throughout his lower abdomen, and he began to suspect something was very wrong. Then, when he went to relieve himself and saw that his urine was bloody, he knew it for a fact. He didn't say anything when Shawnee and Stan returned. No need to worry her any more than need be. They waited anxiously as night fell, but by an hour or so after full dark, they'd neither heard nor seen any sign of the creatures. Eventually, even fear of the creature's return and his increasing pain couldn't keep Piter awake, and he drifted off into a fitful slumber. Sometime later, he became aware of loud noises nearby and managed to open his eyes a crack. Shawnee stood close by, her back to him, and a flaming stick in her hands. Stan was nowhere to be seen, but there was another light in the darkness beyond her in the direction of the noises. That must be Stan over there, but what was he doing? Piter knew he should be alarmed about something, but what it was didn't register. He became fixed on the flames flickering atop Shawnee's stick. Mesmerized. The glow of the flame called to him, and he began to feel light, as though he was just a hair's breadth away from floating up into the sky if only something wasn't anchoring him to the ground. He found himself smiling and thought with bemusement that it had been days since he'd last done that. Why? He couldn't recall. Then darkness closed in again. When he awoke, Shawnee was asleep beside him. Stan stood to the side, clutching his metal pole. The jagged end of the pole was covered in a greenish-gray fluid, and he had several visible cuts on his arms and shoulders. "What happened?" Piter asked, his thoughts more clear this time around. Stan turned to look at him, surprise flickering across his face for a moment. "They came back. One almost got to us by climbing up another one's back." He glanced down at the end of his pole and smirked. "We beat them back, blocked the path with more rocks. They shouldn't bother us again." "That's good," Piter replied. Stan shrugged his shoulders. "Sort of. I don't know that we'll be able to get back down again, though. I really did a number on the path." Glancing at their single bucket of water over by the stack of firewood, he pursed his lips. The implication wasn't lost on Piter. If they couldn't get down and back up again, they couldn't resupply. Crap. Just then he realized he was parched, but he decided against asking for some of the water. Suddenly it seemed like a rare and a precious thing. The next day passed slowly. Early in the morning, Stan and Shawnee went to inspect the path. Piter wanted to come along. He managed to convince them to help him to his feet, but after only a few steps with support from both of them, he collapsed again. His back and belly were too painful and his legs were wobbly. When they returned from their excursion after a long inspection, the despair on Shawnee's eyes told Piter everything he needed to know before she said anything. "Stan was right," she said. "There's no way down. He dislodged a whole lot of rocks and boulders last night. It's pretty impassable." Stan shrugged noncommittally. "Maybe not completely. I can probably climb down, but getting back up?" He spread his hands. "Difficult at best without climbing tools. Impossible with wood or that bucket. If only we had a rope." "So that's it then," Piter said. "We're stuck." Stan nodded. "Afraid so." Piter looked at Shawnee's despairing face and shared the sentiment. But he managed to smile anyway. "Don't worry, babe. The rescue will be along soon. I'm sure that's what the incoming message said." She returned the smile and kissed him on the cheek. He could tell she didn't believe him, though. There was nothing else to do but wait, hope, and conserve their strength. As morning turned to noon and then afternoon, they talked of their previous lives and their plans and hopes for the future. Or rather, Shawnee and Stan did. Piter nodded off frequently, so he only caught bits and pieces. When he awoke in the mid-afternoon, he found himself shivering from chills, despite the fact that it was still warm out. Shawnee was seated next to him, wiping his brow with a wet scrap of cloth. What was she doing? They needed to conserve every drop. He tried to tell her that, but for some reason had trouble getting the words out. So instead he pushed the cloth away, earning a look of reproach from her. "You've got a fever," she said, and lifted a small bottle lid, the cap to something from their first aid kit most likely, to his lips. The lid was filled with water. He drank greedily and tried to sit up, but a renewed pain in his abdomen when he flexed those muscles brought him up short, and he collapsed back onto the ground, breathing heavily. Shawnee frowned with worry and touched his belly, sending another burst of pain running up his spine. "His belly's hard as a rock," he heard her say to Stan, whose face was grim. Internal bleeding was all Piter could make out of Stan's reply before he faded out again. It was dark when he awoke next. His vision was blurry, and it was hard to make out what was going on. There was a flickering light off to the side, the campfire most likely. Shapes moved near the fire, and he heard voices, so he knew he wasn't alone, but he couldn't manage to turn to look at them more closely, so instead he gazed up at the stars. As he lay there, he began to get that feeling of being light again. The stars seemed to beckon, and it was almost as though they were drifting nearer to him. He felt peace and a growing sense of joy, as one in particular turned larger and slowly began to fill his vision. Vaguely he recalled hearing about the tunnel and the light that people reported from near-death experiences, and it occurred to him that he was dying. Strangely, he felt no fear, just a lingering sadness that he'd be leaving Shawnee alone. He tried to call out to her to say goodbye, but he couldn't hear himself speak. A growing rumble in his ears canceled out other sounds. But wait, there she was, standing above him, looking up at the light and waving both of her hands over her head. "You don't have to get God's attention, babe. He knows you're there." Then she looked away from the light and down at him, and he saw that she wore a joyful expression, one of relief. Seeing him awake, she knelt down next to him and gathered him into a warm embrace. "It's the rescue ship," she said into his ear. He managed to return the embrace, however weakly, and smiled.
Okay, so all's well that ends well for Piter and Shawnee and Stan, not necessarily for everybody else, but, well, yeah, the main character made it through, so that's all that counts, right? Yeah! Anyway, hopefully you like that story. I enjoyed writing it. This is one that I wrote, I think I said it before, this is one of my earlier stories. I don't remember exactly when I wrote it, but it's a while back. I still kind of think it's fun, and hopefully you did too. If you did, you know what to do. Obviously, like this video or the podcast episode. If you haven't subscribed yet, you must do that as well. And then go buy my books, not just this book, all the other books. You can get them at michaelkingswood.com/store, which is the best place to go because that's where I get the most money, because directly from my company's web store exchange kind of thing. And so don't have to go through the middleman. Amazon and all those other places, they take 30%. Depending on for the ebook, and more than that for the paperback books. You don't want to give them that money. You want all that come to me. So go straight to michaelkingswood.com/store. That said, if you are still hell bent on going through with all the various retailers, you can. michaelkingswood.com/books to read will get you to the list of all my stuff with links to all the various retailers that you could want to go through that are not me, and that works out just fine too. Still better to come straight to the source, right? Good one-on-one relationship with the writer that you like. Feel a sense of satisfaction of giving the most support possible. You go from there. Anyway, the other things that are going on right now, which are important to know about, important to discuss, is the Kickstarter campaign for 52 Stories in 2023, Volume 4. Which those of you who've been following around for a while know that this has been an ongoing project through all of 2023, writing at least a story a week and getting them out in collections of 10. The first 3 volumes have gone out to the backers and everybody else in the world, and Volume 4 is being Kickstarted right now. There's 5 more days left in this campaign. It ends Tuesday, the 24th, I want to say, of October at noon Pacific time. We have already exceeded the goal. But there are stretch goals we want to get done, which are still unmet, which obviously, to meet more stretch goals, beneficial in 2 different ways. 1, I get more money. 2, you guys get more cool stories and have more fun, which means you'll like me more and come back and give me more money. You know what I mean. So if you haven't backed the campaign yet or even checked it out yet, please go do so. And show us some love, because if you like the stories I'll be reading here on this podcast, you're going to like the stories on those books. And obviously supporting artists as they produce things makes it more likely they're going to produce more things that you like. So why don't you go do that. michaelkingswood.com/52 michaelkingswood.com/52 in 23 V4 will get you over to that campaign where you can get all 4 volumes of the project so far, and other good stuff of mine that you may or may not enjoy. Of course you'll enjoy it because it's from me, so therefore it's awesome. But everybody has different tastes. Maybe you like sci-fi more than fantasy. Good thing for you, I do both. Maybe you like mystery. Hey, look at that, I do that too. Everything you like, you can get there. Anyway, like I said before, I'm going to be a little bit off of my normal Story Saturday thing the next couple weeks because of the sailboat trip. We'll do some streaming, probably, hopefully, and from the boat, you guys can, participate at least somewhat. At the very least, I'll take some little videos and put up shorts or something, but it'll be fun regardless. So this is going to be cool the next couple weeks, but I won't be around too much. Hopefully you guys will live without me, judging by the subscribership. I'm not sure that you will be able to, but you're going to have to figure out a way. Alright, so beginning of November, we'll recommence Story Saturday with the next one. I'm not sure exactly which story we're doing next. I'll determine that and let you know as we commence. But thanks for tuning in. I'll talk to you next time. Until then, don't do anything I wouldn't do.